Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has thanked Chief Justice, his staff and families for all the sacrifices that they've made during the course of the past 4 years. He says that the report will mark the start of a new chapter for South Africa.
Close on 6 years have passed since former public protector, Advocate Thulima Madonsela, released her State of Capture report. The State of Capture report presented evidence of abuse of power and how public institutions were repurposed to enable corrupt activities to take place. Recognizing that the evidence that had been presented to her required more extensive investigation, Advocate Madonsela included among the remedial actions in her report that a judicial commission of inquiry should be established to investigate state capture. And this is what has brought us where we are today. The formal handover today of this final report represents the fulfillment of the remedial action that was set out in the State of Capture report as issued by the then Public Protector. The work of this commission is a vital part on our efforts to deal with state capture. The report is far more than a record of widespread corruption, fraud, and abuse. It is also an instrument through which the country can work to ensure that such events, such as state capture, never ever happen again in our country. As a nation, we owe a great debt of gratitude to the chairperson of the Commission, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, for the monumental task that he and the evidence leaders, investigators, the lawyers, as well as researchers have been undertaking over the past 4 years. And this has been work that they have done in service to our people and our country. I wish also to thank the many people who gave evidence before the Commission, and especially to the whistleblowers, to the academics, to the investigators, and yes, to journalists as well, whose work contributed to uncovering many of the matters before the Commission.
Well, to help us unpack some of this report, we're now joined by Lebohang Pheko, who's the Managing Director of Four Rivers Analysts. She joins us now on the line for more. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Peter, and to the viewers.
To say that there was a great expectation for this inquiry report, not just this chapter, but all of it, the results of 4 years' work, especially when we look back in history, and I'm thinking of the Arms Inquiry Commission and how in the end a lot of people were left disappointed. Chief Justice Zondo really had high expectations that he had to meet, I guess.
He had very high expectations. This has been a very costly exercise. It began its work in 2017, so we're almost this is going into the 5th year. There have been over 300 witnesses already, and it has traversed a huge range. I mean, there's a table of context, including the State Security Agency, Crime Intelligence, the SABC, Waterkloof Landing, PRASA. So it's almost a narration of the past 10 years and some of the excesses around fraud, corruption, and state capture.
So the inquiry was into allegations of state capture. Do you think that the case has been made?
Well, look, I'm only on about page 17 out of 472, but certainly I do think that as an exercise in trying to really resuscitate and trying to redeem good governance, sound governance, transparency, accountability, and all of these things that we talk about often but don't necessarily always understand how important they are. This kind of process and institutional building for public confidence, for citizens' confidence, and also to remind ourselves that, by the way, we are still trying to redeem this country. I think that in that regard, it has been quite useful. But again, Peter, as you rightly said, many of these commissions have come and gone in the past, and sometimes with varying degrees of finality. Even if the efficacy we can question, but the cost we can question. But I think what is required now is the now what? What are the consequences? Is there going to be consequence management? Having trawled through hundreds and hundreds of pages, the cumulative total number of volume of these findings is substantial.
The president said that this is a new chapter for the country and that this should never happen again. If we stay the way that we are, it could happen again. I guess a lot of things need to be learnt from this exercise, and a lot of things changed.
Well, I think we've heard it should never happen again quite a few times, and I think that it's also it's important that we, in this moment, to avoid hyperbole. It is important to avoid making promises that potentially can't really be kept. And certainly, I think if we even understand what state capture is, for example, and I think that's the other thing, is the terminology has been so used that we forget that, firstly, it's certainly not a uniquely South African phenomena, and it used to be called good old-fashioned corruption, bribery, neo-patrimonialism, and so forth. So I think that's the one thing, is that we need to situate it within our understanding of what it has now come to mean. And I think it's also important that even though it's very pervasive, that we understand that it's and distinguish between the sorts of institutions that have the potential to be, I'm cautious to use the word captured, but certainly vulnerable to certain sorts of undue influence, including the legislature, the executive arm, the judiciary, regulatory agencies, public works ministries, and all the sorts of actors who are always trying to seek influence, large private firms, multinationals, political leaders, both local, regional, international, various high-ranking officials, different sorts of interest groups. Right now that would be, your big pharma and other sorts of formations. So it's the whole notion of state capture encompasses a spider's web of processes, of interests, local and international. It also encompasses a whole array of different legal and regulatory shortcuts, diversions. It also encompasses financial concealment, and so it's a really complex animal. And I think that at the day, it's important that we don't just throw this word around without populating it with the deep meaning that it's supposed to convey and the deep implications of that meaning.
I suppose for South Africans to feel that justice has been done and that the billions that have been spent on this were worth it, we're going to have to see some people prosecuted and go to jail. Yeah,
we are probably going to have to see some people prosecuted and go to jail. And I suppose the people are obviously looking at the Gupta family, but as I say, it's really a web. If we look at just the extent of this is really how then we challenge what this means in the context of a state that is already so weakened over the last five or 10 years economically. We didn't quite recover from 2008, and then of course the COVID pandemic and the sort of the management of that, and sometimes the mismanagement of that, no doubt, have also weakened the state fiscus quite considerably. So I think there isn't a great. I think that the public have rightly don't have a great appetite and patience for rhetoric, for political rhetoric. And remember that think that this also comes at a time when there have been different forms of industrial action and some grievances from, public sector workers in relation to the recent wage increases of senior officials, of office bearers. Remember that the miners were camping out at union buildings. The Sabanye miners were camping out at the union buildings for weeks and weeks in this weather. So I think that the public sentiment is that certainly the economy is, the economic situation is that they need pay rises, they need service delivery. They certainly need to understand that, the money that they pay, that we all pay taxes very painfully through the wound through, is being disposed of and is being appropriately dispensed.
All right, and perhaps finally, gosh, I've lost my train of thought there, but I guess the final chapter, the final chapter really is, as we've talked about, the prosecutions, but what might be the political fallout, do you think, of this final chapter and the report in its entirety?
I'm not sure, actually, but I do want to say something about illicit financial flows, because that's actually what I was briefed on, if I may. And I think that's quite an important aspect of the report. So I think, for one thing, is to also appreciate the amount that has been leaked out of the fiscus over the last few years, and certainly during this particular dispensation. And now that's in line with what has been taken out. We're aware that already over the last 10-year period, about South Africa lost billions of dollars US, actually, about $100 billion over a 10-year period, and that was even before this particular dispensation and this, of what has been, characterized as capture. And I think that when we put that into perspective, we have just taken on a World Bank loan, as you're aware, for about $480 million US. So basically, if we'd been able to leverage this and repatriate these funds, that means that in essence we'd have been able to tell the World Bank thank you and no thank you, and avoid this debt, the posterity of greater debt and possibly greater retraction and constriction of public sector and public service provision. This also comes at a time when there have been threats to reduce 300 billion rands from the public sector wage bill. So this leaking of the state fiscus should not be underestimated, and the consequences not only for this moment laterally, but sort of intergenerational, the posterity consequences are just humongous.
Lebohang Pheko, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and good luck with your overnight reading. I'm sure you've got a report that reads like a novel.
No, you can't make this stuff up. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. That's Lebohang Pheko, who's a political economist, talking to us about some of the implications of what's come out of this report, particularly the financial flows there, which are of concern. But what about the legal story? What do we make of what happens now going forward? Well, senior advocate and legal commentator Mpumelelo Zikalala is on Zoom to share his views and his thoughts. Importantly, how the MPA should move forward after this. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for hosting me, and also good evening to your viewers.
All right, before we even get to the NPA, I just want to understand the legal premise of the state capture inquiry itself and the recommendations that flow from it. How much power and weight do they have?
They do have power, because if you want to overpower or go against any of those recommendations, you have to go to court. They can't be wished away by any other entity other than the courtroom. But just remember that they derive their power from the Commissions Act, which is an act which was enacted in 1947. It's very old, by the way. And at the time, I think it had a few muscles and a few teeth. But if you look at it now, for me, I would say there are a few flaws in which this particular act is limping on, and especially when it comes to those recommendations and the fact-finding mission. What I also think that, as it has happened in this case, people who had commissions, sometimes they miss the point of why the commission is there. It is an investigative process where you then say, what are the innovative ways can you come up with to deal with this extraordinary problem that we have? You have to look at the current laws that we have, whether they're sufficient or not, whether they work. If they don't work, what other recommendations can they be, so that at the end of the day, you don't end up being the connector or the post office between one party to another. Because in the number of recommendations that you would read from this commission, from this report, for example, they would say the law enforcement agencies must further investigate this particular matter, and it ends there. Now, other than that, there's nothing else in which the commission comes up with which is innovative, which at the end of the day is going to assist us in making sure that we never go through this process again. Again, emphasis must be placed on the innovativeness of the commission, because 4 years later and 1 billion rand, or close to approximately 1 billion rand down the line, you have to come up with something which has more meat. Where if you translate it more loosely, you then say, where's the value for money in all this process? What can we do so that at the end of the day we are able to say we've been able to do a very expensive exercise, but it has yielded results. But what was disappointing to me is to find the chairperson of the commission saying to us, I did not look or investigate the law enforcement agencies as to whether they're efficiently working or not, whether they were captured at the time or not, whether there's something impeding them from doing the work in which they're supposed to do. In the same breath, I did not look into the NPA in terms of whether are they able to work optimally. Now, these are the very two instruments which are required to deal with state capture. If you are going to pass over information into law enforcement agencies which are dysfunctional, you are going to come back with the same problem, the same issues that dealt you and led you to where you are today. So I think it may have done its work in terms of laying the scene as to what exactly happened or what is alleged to have happened at that particular point in time, but it has failed to come to a conclusion in terms of saying, in the current measures that we have to prevent these sort of things from happening, in the current measures that we have to recover the taxpayers' money, is there anything flawed that we have to look into as South Africans? Is there something that we can suggest to prevent this type of thing from happening again?
You said that the scope was too wide and that it would have taken too long. So I suppose he had to look at one aspect. Does that then, and also there were very specific entities that were looked at, and one family maybe in particular, some people might say, it perhaps points to there could have been state capture happening with other families in other entities in parallel.
That's why you then have to say, let me look at the tools which will enable me to find other instances of state capture rather than focusing on one family, rather than focusing on one department, which at the end of the day, I won't have power to arrest. No matter what we can say, the Commission does not have power to prosecute. It's only the NPA that can do that. The Commission does not have power to properly investigate these matters so that they are trial ready. It is the law enforcement agencies which are able to do that particular process. So after the first year, after you've had evidence of various instances of maladministration, various instances where board of directors are not doing their fiduciary duties, all that you're supposed to say as the Commission's chairperson is to say, I want to know what's preventing law enforcement agencies from investigating these matters. Let's take one example, the asbestos matter. It is a matter which was always out there in the public but was never investigated. Why aren't you interested in knowing why the police dragging their feet? Why aren't you interested in terms of knowing what's the problem with the NPA in terms of them coming to account? It is not going to be that hard of an exercise. It simply means that you send a notice to the head of the law enforcement agencies, the various type of them, your SAPS, your Hawks, or SIU, and then you send another notice to the NPA and simply say to them, come and explain to me how are you working within your particular department? Are there any impediments that you've been able to find which were preventing you from executing this type of matters? Is there anyone which is impeding you now to execute this type of matters? Let's add on the NPA. They were made part, or they were made to sit in during these particular sittings. So for the last 24 months, they've been there actively listening. Now, the most important question is, what have you been doing in the past 24 months that is preventing you from doing all this arrest and taking matters to court. Let's remember, when you go to court, there's an added burden when it comes to the NPA, because they have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that whatever individual has been brought to court is guilty. Now, the quality and the quantity of the evidence in which you are bringing is very important. People are going to pass on, they're going to die, evidence is going to be destroyed, other individuals are going to stay in other countries, as we have now, where the particular Gupta family, which is closely linked to this particular process, is nowhere to be found. Now, if we don't want to move in as quickly as possible on that particular process, that's when you are going to find the issues in which you are going to have. For me, the commission concentrated in an area which has already been decided, in an area in which other institutions are much better equipped to do that particular investigation and take the matter forward, and neglected to provide us the innovativeness, which is the true intention of the commission.
Right.
Now, at the end of the day, they're giving us an answer of saying we didn't have time to look at the real core stuff of what we were supposed to look at.
All right. So you've mentioned the MPA quite a bit, but before we get to the MPA, the people who've been implicated in this inquiry can take their report on judicial review, I'm guessing. Does that in any way impact on the work that the MPA can do in parallel?
No, it doesn't. Let's remember what the NPA does. It says, these are the type of investigation and the reports that we have. This is the evidence that we have against you. We so believe that you have certain things in which you must answer in a proper, normal, in a court of law. So I'm going to take you to court and charge you, regardless of the fact that you've sent this particular recommendation to be set aside. Let's remember the other good thing which was done when this particular process of the commission was sitting is that the president signed into law a proclamation saying that whatever evidence which is found within the particular commission can then be used by the NPA in its honest investigation. So they're simply going to say, yes, we're part and process of the commission. However, we are not told by the commission as to how we're supposed to do our job, and our improving or maybe acting on our mandate is not solely dependent on the instructions of the commission. The Constitution tells us what exactly we need to do, what type of matters we need to investigate. We've done exactly that, and we so believe that you have something to answer. Please come to court as an accused this time, so that you can be able to come back and deal with whatever issues or allegations which can be against. The problem with that, and something which we're going to find quite a lot in a number of matters within this particular commission, is that the level of the evidence, the quality of the evidence may not be enough in certain instances to be able to get a conviction. And you may find people that they are implicated as per the report. However, if you take them to court, the court will come to a different conclusion. So that's the type of issues and type of problem that they are going to find. But I think the NPA, if they want to improve the brand of the NPA and to make sure that it improves the trust that we as members of the public have towards it, they must look at the low-hanging fruits and say, in those individuals that you can be able to hold accountable now, let's deal with them as soon as possible so that we can clearly show that these are the individuals that we've pursued and we've been successful.
And I suppose what the MPA has access to now is there must have been senior officials in government who can be subpoenaed to witness in court that perhaps had an option whether to testify or not at the Commission of Inquiry. So it could be that there's more evidence out there waiting to be picked up.
Definitely. And another advantageous point in which the NPA comes in is that if you do not want to participate with us, then we can simply call you in as a co-accused. If you're government officials, you have the Public Finance Management Act, which places various onerous duties on anyone who's employed in terms of what is it that they're supposed to do. If you fail to do those particular duties, then it is an offense and there are penalties which are involved. And a number of them include being brought into a court of law so that you are able to answer. So the question or the options that would be there would be either You are with us as the NPA as a witness, in which you'll be able to prove that in this big shot, towards this big shots that you are looking for, please provide information, any information that you may know, and that will assist us in making sure that we provide a conviction. If you don't, just know that we are going to charge you as per the PFMA, and you may find yourself with a criminal record, either with a fine or with a jail sentence.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. These are interesting times that we're living through, and we wait to see how this next chapter, which is the work of the MPA, the government, Parliament, and various authorities, and what they do next. But thank you for your insights, and also a bit of clarity about what a commission of inquiry should be doing, investigating, rather than just trying to prosecute. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for hosting me. I think the next 2 to 3 weeks is going to be very interesting. It's going to be a number of people going to court seeking to set aside any findings which are against them by the commission.
All right, I'm going to follow your Twitter page intently. Thank you so much. All right, that's...